Hi people, Daniel from Devil & Sons Guitars here, and today I'm going to show you how to wet sand your guitar in prep for final buffing. Great, so this is the penultimate video in a series of videos that I'm making and have made that follow you through the stages of taking a guitar, prepping it to prime, priming, painting, varnishing, now this penultimate wet sanding before you do the final buffing mirror glaze video. The mirror glaze video has been up for some time. The other videos are coming very soon, so stay tuned for them. But in this video I've decided to focus on a guitar which has a giraffe skin print on it. And the reason I focus on that is it's quite interesting the way it's got a lot of texture to it. So it was primed in grey, it had 3 coats of the yellow put on, sanded flat, another coat of the yellow, sanded flat. Then I masked out the areas where I didn't want any paint to go on, leaving the brown sections of the giraffe, which I then painted in. Then I removed the mask, and that left the brown on top of the yellow, but very slightly raised, because obviously there's more paint there, because the brown paint is only in those sections. Then I did the Spray Max clear coat layers. Now with the Spray Max, normally you would do 3 coats in one go and that's enough. But because this guitar's got a texture, which you'll see in a moment, what I ended up doing was my standard 3 coats, leaving it to dry, lightly sanding that Spray Max, the clear coat, and then applying another 3 coats of the clear coat. I had to lightly sand between those 3 because I didn't do them in the same sitting. 6 coats in one sitting is too much, it won't cure properly. And because there's a gap between the sittings, you have to allow some sort of keying by sanding into the surface for the next coats to fit on. So that's the stage you're at. It's been painted, it's been clear coated, it's still got a slight texture, a slight bump to it from where the clear coat's gone on. We need to get rid of that in order to then buff it up to a mirror glaze. So let's look at the guitar and look at the process. So here, looking closely at the surface, you can see as the light pans across it a sort of texture on the paint. Now that's called orange peel. That's where the paint in this case has been applied quite thickly. It's also partly because of the texture of the paint I used underneath. Also, you can see at the edges of the shapes where the masking was, the paint is slightly raised, and that's noticeable because on the clear coat you can see a sort of shine along the edge, and I can actually use that as a guideline when we're sanding flat. So what we're going to do is take our sandpaper, and I'm starting with 800 grit, and I'm going to sand the body of the guitar, starting on the front. I'm going to work the entire front, then my method is normally to work on the back and then to work around the sides. Now the key thing here is I'm using a cork block to sand with. I'm using clean water. You need to use clean water each time you're swapping the grade of sandpaper. Again, we're starting with 800 grade, and I'm working at the moment just lightly over the entire body. What I will then do is use some kitchen roll to wipe it back. I'm not using too much water. I don't want to drench the surface in water. But what you'll notice as you sand is it begins to become easier to sand. There's less resistance when the surface gets smoother and smoother. So what I'm doing here is working away that orange peel, working away the lumps that overlap the brown paint. But I'm not going to be working so hard that I go through the varnish into the paint, because the varnish has got, as I said, 6 layers really built up over the paint. Normally you'd only use 3 if you're using just a plain colour underneath or a sunburst, but because this has got that pattern that's been masked out, it has got some raised areas. I like to work in this circle shape. I work my way round in sections. You can see the area where I just wiped back has a kind of white sheen to it. Now that white sheen is where we've really sanded back and it's sanded flat. When the area gets wet again, it gives the illusion of what it's going to look like once we've got to the final buffing stage. But right now it's important to dry it so you can really see how flat you've sanded. I'm going to keep this piece of video going in real time just to give you an idea of how long something might take. But As I change angles and change paper, etc., I'm going to speed it up so you don't have to sit through the entire process, because it can take quite a long time. Sometimes people like to put a drop of washing up liquid in their water. They think it helps relieve the tension and the friction as you're working away. I used to do that, but I don't do that anymore. It's really a matter of choice. Now, one thing to look out for is where the edges curve around. That's a point where when you're sanding you can accidentally apply too much pressure and start working through the varnish and revealing the paint underlayers. So that's, in this case, working away and rubbing away the brown, or even rubbing away the yellow to reveal the grey primer coat underneath. I'm also using my hands to feel how flat and smooth it is. So here, as a close-up, you can see the areas that are sort of flat and white are where I've managed to sand back, but the sort of more shiny bits, they're like the dimples in the paint, where the paint is recessed and I haven't quite sanded flat enough. So I know I've got to work on that. Here I'm going to focus on that one particular area that had that really shiny section on it. I've sped this up so you don't have to sit through it all. And I'm really just going to work on that and keep drying it back until I can see that that area is completely smooth. And then I will go on to another area. So by completely smooth, I mean getting rid of any shine. Here we can see the line between where the brown and the yellow is. When I move my light, it really emphasises the raised part of the varnish. So here again, rubbing to smooth it back. And what you notice is when there is still a raised section, the sort of scum that you're rubbing off of the surface that's collecting in the water builds up around those lines. So you want to keep working until they're gone. When I work around a side like this, you'll notice it really forms a shape where it's not going over the curves of the side, it's just going on the flat section. Almost you can see here a long rectangle of where I'm sanding away. So I'm going to keep sanding like that all around the edge, and then I'm going to come back and sand lightly over the curves where the top and the front meet. So that's what I'm doing in this section here. And I've got to be extra careful, as I said, because that's the point where the paint can easily be at its thinnest and the varnish can be at its thinnest. So you could easily sand through that if you're too quick or too heavy. So I keep sanding very lightly, drying back, checking to see if it's smooth, and then working on again. So I couldn't get away without putting a little montage in of me working. I've got my guitar leaning on a board that's got foam on it to make sure that there's no scratches that are going to come through from the surface that I might be leaning on. Now, this is a trick I've mentioned before in various videos, so sorry to repeat myself, but I think it's a really important one. I'm here mixing 50% distilled malt vinegar, white vinegar, and 50% meths together. And what that creates is a liquid that's really good for cleaning away the grime and dirt off the surface of wood, and in this case everything that we've sanded back off of the surface of the varnish. And the reason this is really good is, unlike water, it evaporates very quickly, and that means it doesn't have a chance to really soak into the wood. Now obviously this guitar has got the varnish on, so it's not really going to soak in, but it's a really good way to get that surface really clean. It's a trick that I was taught by a woodworker on a French polishing course that I went on years ago. He'd been using it for his whole career, and I really trusted what he said were the best ways of working. Now, if you do find this video useful, you can support me not just by sharing the video and liking it, etc. on YouTube, but also I sell merchandise, so do check out my website. So once you've worked over with the 800 grit, it's time to move on to 1000, and then I move on to 1500. So doing exactly that same process another 2 times. So here I sped this up. I don't really need to show you the whole process again because you know what it's like. But essentially with the first pass with the 800, you would have got rid of all of the shiny bits to get it really flat. and now you're working with a finer sandpaper. So what you're going to find is the surface starts to become more shiny when you work at it again. Some people might use more passes than 3 different grits. For example, 800, 1000, you could drop in a 1200, and sometimes people would go up further than 1500. I used to go up to 1800, sometimes 2000, but I found that's not that necessary now because I've started using this Meguiar's mirror glaze as my next stage. Like I said, I've got a whole other video on that where you can see that process of taking it from where we're leaving it now to make it really mirror and shiny. And here I'm just dropping in some images of the finished guitar, just so you know what it looks like. I know I'm repeating myself here, but I do have a video where I focused on that. For now, thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful. Don't forget to check out the mirror glaze video and the earlier videos in this series to see the process you go through from start to finish. Until next time, happy strumming.